This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and graphic design. I'm Grace Charlton, and on today's programme, it's the first of our 2 episodes dedicated to the Venice Architecture Biennale. We'll speak with different participating architects and curators who are presenting at the 19th edition of the event and visit the Danish, Brazilian and Swiss pavilions. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. Hello and welcome to today's programme. I'm joined down the line by Monocle's design editor, Nick Moniz. Nick, hello, how are you and where are you?
Hello, Grace Charlton. I am in Copenhagen, which has been the next stop on this ridiculous world tour. You've been joining me at various times in Venice, which is what this week's show is all about. But just kind of soaking up a little courtyard moment in Copenhagen, which is lovely.
Lucky you. I mean, we were just on a boat in Venice. We were there for the Architecture Biennale. It's going to be open until November, so lots of time for people to go and enjoy all the pavilions and the halls.
This was your first time, so I'm very, very keen to hear your takeaway, but this is the 3rd edition that I've been to, and it's kind of my favourite event on the design calendar. I'm not afraid to say that, purely because this is the one event that really is just about ideas and concepts and research. Any commerce is kind of stripped away at this. That can come later, is the idea behind it. This is really kind of about kickstarting conversations and better ways of building, and it takes place in the most amazing city in the world. We're constantly talking about how beautiful Venice is, and I think the perfect place for an architecture event to be held, because it feels like the city itself kind of sits at this confluence of all these issues that architects need to tackle. Kind of within Venice, you've at the coalface of climate change and rising sea levels, you've got historic preservation concerns, you've got social and cultural concerns around over-tourism and ageing populations. It's sort of the place to kind of tackle all these potential issues. You're a first-time visitor. I feel like you kind of got your head around it. How does the Biennale work through your eyes? You've got the Giardini, you've got the Arsenale. What's the setup?
A lot of the national pavilions are in the Giardini, Italian for garden. Some of them are like neoclassical buildings from the 30s. Other are more modern. There's the Arsenale, which is this huge former shipyard, which isn't too far away, where there are more national pavilions, and then this big exhibition, which was Carlo Ratti's challenge to a lot of people. Maybe this is a nice moment to talk about the theme this year, which was Intelligence, Natural, Artificial, Collective. And 750 people participated in trying to tackle this theme. I was really pleasantly surprised at how there seems to be zero commercial incentive. It's just about deep thinking. Did you notice any wider threads? Were there any surprises in terms of this theme and how they addressed it?
You mentioned Carlo Ratti there. He's an Italian architect and engineer who was tapped as the curator of this year's Biennale, which obviously means setting that theme. I was lucky enough to talk to him in the lead up to it, and there were some themes that did emerge. I was kind of reflecting on that conversation today. His big thing was, these are his words, but architecture starts when the climate is against us. It's about survival. Climate and the natural environment is changing and transforming so rapidly at the moment, and for the most part for the worse. He sort of sees architecture as this main mechanism for us adapting and working with the environment, and I feel like that was almost a theme that kind of came through this. So many of the pavilions were about looking to indigenous architectures or architectures pre-industrialisation, before we relied on steel and glass and air conditioning to build internal climates that are habitable. And instead, it's about looking for ways that we built in the past. We went to a host of different pavilions that did this. There was Oman, Bahrain, even Australia, looking to their indigenous knowledge and indigenous ways of building that perhaps have been looked over in recent times as people and those commissioning architecture have turned to the star-architects. Another one that kind of really ticked that box was Brazil. And I know you spoke to the curator there.
Yeah, so we're now going to head to the Brazilian pavilion. I spoke to one of the curators, Mateo Seco, about the installation that was there. It was called Reinvention. It was a gorgeous setup. They had lots of case studies up on the wall where you could really nerd out over all the different details. But a lot of it was about connecting to the ancient knowledge that, Brazil has and how indigenous practices really could inform today sustainable architecture and like mitigate climate change. I think I really loved just how information heavy it was and the different case studies. There's one about drainage, which is not necessarily the most sexy of topics, but they did a really good job at showing how ancient practices could be used in favelas in the cities of Brazil. There was also a lot about biophilia. Let's hear now from one of the curators of the exhibition, Mateus Seco.
So when we came up with this idea of occupying the space, the expography design is really connected to the theme itself. So in the first room, we are talking about the Amazon, archaeological findings in the Amazon. All the panels are connected to the ground, and it's more like a relationship between the exhibition itself and the building. And inside this other room, we take the same elements and to float them, to put them floating around, because we're talking about balance. The new findings on the Amazon, they show that the forest is in reality a result of human occupation, but a balanced occupation along many years. So we started from that, and on the second room we think about how can we find the same balance inside the complex realities of the contemporary Brazilian city and the world around. This idea of the balance was the idea that inspired the whole installation. All the wooden panels here, they are connected to these pulleys. The pulleys were made for the space. Each one of the pulleys has a certain weight that it can hold. So we had a sculptor to sculpt the stones to a certain weight, because like all the calculations of the panels, it has to do with this idea of the balance and all. I was just now like trying to adjust, because every movement in any stone can change the whole setup. So it's
not stressful at all. No, these people are going to come.
But it moves a bit. I think that's the beauty of the installation, because it moves a bit. In here we call it this detail like the hug, because it's hugging the tube. It's no connection really. It's only the tension of the weight. In this room, the installation, it's all made for this building. All the dimensions are made for this building. All the modulation that we did has a dialogue with the building. And then in this room, all the themes here are related to the contemporary Brazilian cities. We selected 12 different strategies that, in our view, they represent some kind of balance between humans, nature, and cities as a way to learn from our built environment and try to apply some of the strategies for the realities of the future. The installation itself follows certain rules, for example, that we defined that are also connected to this year Calorati idea, which is, for example, the idea was to try to change the spatiality of the room with the least elements that we could find. So it's minimal elements to change the whole space. All these elements here are recyclable. The idea is they're going to be used for furniture, or the stones are going to be used for something else, the cables also. So it's all about doing a lot with a few elements. We worked with archaeologists in the first room to draw the maps and to amplify some of the archaeological sites.
And in terms of the case studies, there are 12 of them. They're all quite different. One of them was also super interesting about sewage over there. Yeah. It's funny because the theme is very future-focused this year, but you've taken it back to one of the oldest civilizations.
In Brazil, we grew up thinking about the Amazon in a totally different way, as a hostile environment for humans. We thought that in school that there were few people there when the European settlers, and there was nothing, no cities. That's because the occupations used to build with wood and other degradable materials. A few years ago, there was a project to scan the forest, to try to survey the quantity of the amount of carbon in the trees, and they started to see like laser scan, so they can see what's underneath the trees without cutting them. So they started to find these geometrical lines that indicated roads, for example, beneath the trees. So it's a really beautiful project. On one hand, we have these findings that tell us that the Amazon was a contrary, because they didn't have a big city because everything was so fertile. So they could move anywhere, so they had lots of resources. There's some calculations that say the population was 10 times higher. Nowadays, it's incredible. And of course, after the settlers came, all the impact it had, also like the population shrank. But the thing is, we started to find these things. And the beautiful thing about it, besides the archaeological findings and this idea of a symbiosis between humans and nature, which is possible, we can see that, to learn from our ancient people, ancient originary indigenous people, and try to apply this idea of finding a balance in the city. there's this layer of preservation as well, because besides being like an environmental protection, now we have this cultural protection. Besides being like really important in terms of vegetation and everything, it's also important because of the archaeology. There are archaeologists working there, but they have lots of hypotheses, but nothing really clear yet. So it's really beautiful to think about it, what they will achieve. These geoglyphs are the contact point that we found between architecture and archaeology. So if we think about infrastructure as a way to hold life and to maybe hold life in a way that you can also promote nature. Brazil is a really large country, and it's almost a continent. So I tried to look at different strategies for each biome. So we have the Amazon biome and we have the south, which is close to the Pampas in Argentina, really different from each other. So also we tried to select things that responded to certain biomes, certain limits or certain temperatures or certain weather conditions as a way to let's understand where we are. There's no universal solution, but there's a universal method, we think, which is understanding where you are. So I think all these projects, they have this thing of understanding the situation and trying to work with as few resources as possible.
That was co-curator Mateo Secco there.
Watch out for Monocle films. Since launch, Monocle's eagle-eyed filmmakers and journalists have cut and framed visually vivid dispatches and documentaries from all corners of the globe. From industry reports and intrepid journeys to one-on-one interviews with voices that inspire.
You only get one chance in life to do something like this and be part of it. If it works or not, who knows, but you can only try.
With hundreds of films available, there's plenty of exploring to be done. Just head to monocle.com/film now.
Nick, it's your turn now, and it's fitting that you're in Denmark. Which pavilion are we going to next?
It would be wild if we weren't going to the Danish pavilion, but we are. This is a structure, again, in the Giardini. It's one of the permanent pavilions. It was designed by Carl Brummer in the early 1930s and then restored and expanded in the 1950s. I think that's appropriate because it's also undergoing another renovation at the moment, which is what the Danish exhibition at the Biennale is all about. The title of their showcase is called Build of Sight, and for the duration of the Biennale, basically their pavilion is going to become a paused construction site. So there's all the materials that have kind of been ripped up from the ground because they're redoing a level of the flooring, repurposing it, using it to create temporary walls, furniture, temporary flooring. And the whole idea behind it is to, I guess, encourage people to consider the existing materials. And we talk so much about carbon emissions. It's one thing, yes, to build something new that is low carbon or carbon neutral, but it's also another thing to knock down something that's already working and start again, because you've got all that embodied carbon. And I guess that's what this exhibition was really about, encouraging people to, I guess, look and work with what's already there.
You caught up with curator and architect Søren Filman, who we're going to hear from now.
We're looking at some of the debris and the leftover from this ongoing renovation project that we are carrying out right now. The whole idea with this exhibition is that we are carrying out a permanent full-scale renovation of the Danish pavilion here in Venice, but at the same time we are looking into how we can be better at utilize all construction waste for various purposes. That's the direction architects move in the future. We should be better at finding our resources within the built environment instead of nature.
So it's not even about reusing the building necessarily. It's about also finding new purposes or new ways to reuse the materials that come out of a renovation.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's reuse on many different scales. I think it is super important that we become better at utilizing our existing built environment, as buildings. But we should also be better at looking, in a smaller scale, how do we find value on some construction waste, or a small piece of stone from some of our buildings. It's not just for the sake of reusing, it's also because there's so many things embedded to it, like histories, narratives, artifacts that you can't make up if you do something from scratch, but you can you get that for free. And I think there is a huge potential to that. So this is just one big experiment we are carrying out here.
Can you talk us through an example? I mean, we've got some samples laid out. Firstly, maybe what the product is, and then what the potential story or takeaway is.
Yeah, sure. So right now we're looking at a table, and if we start from the bottom part, we have.
Oh, so we're going right to the base of this structure. We're not just looking at what's on top.
No. I think we should because everything in this pavilion come from the pavilion. Nothing is being brought in. Like, of course, I would say nothing. There is tools, molds, people, so in that sense there's been brought in some stuff. But if you look at this table, it has a base that consists of excavated earth that we just rammed, and it serves perfectly as a base for this table. Then the middle part of the table is bigger chunks that has been cut out from the former floor, the floor that we are going to renovate. And then on top of that, we have some profiles, which is excavated sands and silt, that we then, and this is where we introduce some novel components, where we mix that with alginate. And then the alginate hardens it up, and suddenly it looks almost like some kind of weird concrete.
Yeah, or somewhere between concrete and stone is what I'm getting.
Yeah,
like it looks very, very natural, but also
exactly.
That you can tell it's man-made.
But it also gets some of its like organic shape because it shrinks that much, because it has a lot of water in it, and it disappears and it shrinks, and then it gets this organic shape. And then on top of that, we have these corrugated boards, which is made out of, again, excavated earth mixed with various types of bio-based leftover binders. So some of them is gelatin, some of it is fish gelatin, some of it is chitosan from shrimp shells, all these kind of things. So we also just use this as an opportunity to invite people down here that are doing research within all these fields already. So this is an ongoing research project from the Copenhagen University.
The
corrugated boards here, like to find another candidate than cement, which is bio-based. We did our first analysis when we came here to Venice, and afterwards we just got in contact with a lot of people we thought were doing interesting work, which was about finding value in some of the things that we normally don't find that much value in.
So what's your hope? What do you hope kind of people take away from this? If I'm an architect and I'm coming in here, or a researcher and I'm coming in here, what do you want people to bring back to their practice elsewhere?
I hope that they can relate to this exhibition as a demonstration of a method. So it's not like, of course, here it's very local, it's hyper-local. Everything you see was in the pavilion already, but I want this to be presented more like as a method that you can use universally, everywhere. Because I think if we become better at forming our architecture based on the materials that we find in that specific site where we built, there's a huge potential within that we haven't explored already. And I like personally to work that way. That's how we do at the office. All our projects always take their starting point in the place, not in a symbolic context awareness, but more on a material level. What materials are present and how can we utilize them? So
the hope would be maybe somebody's doing a renovation in Sydney, they might find some rubble there that they can repurpose into a table or a platform. That's the other thing. You've got various different repurposings here.
Yeah.
So it's really to show that the potential is endless.
Exactly.
And then tell us a little bit about the architecture and the renovation, because obviously we've got one component here where it's about reusing the existing materials, but there's also something to be said about reusing an existing building or repurposing an existing building.
Sure. Let's go into the other side of the pavilion, because what we found was that in this space we actually have a well-functioning building. Like the slab is reinforced, which wasn't in here in the other space, so it was cracking, leading to water coming up from underneath.
So paint the picture for our listeners.
So in the corridor area where we're standing right now, and in the adjacent hall next to it, like this gallery space called the Cock Hall, all of this, the floor was cracking because it was not reinforced, and was also placed lower than in the space we just came from. So what we're doing here is that we want, after the exhibition is over, we want to raise the floor. We're going to strengthen the floor, and then we're also carrying out some smaller renovation of existing windows, doors. This used to be a window, now turned into a pivot door. So we just took the existing window, made a collaboration with some skilled carpenters here from Venice, and now they made this strengthening of the old frame and added a bottom to pivot hinge and a top pivot hinge, and now you can actually open and close it. And it was a function that was needed, because over the last 8-10 biennales, this window has been taken in and out. Then it's been demounted, been mounted again, because some people want people to be able to walk through, some people won't let them walk through, so now they can do both.
So it was responding to use, recognising that for the building to have more longevity, it's better to make this sort of adjustment.
And I think this comes back to this whole idea of talking about reuse in different scales, that it's not just about reuse, it's about looking into the potential of the materials, that you can accept that they are on a journey somewhere, and you can help them go in that direction if you just listen carefully enough. So I think in this case, the overall building needed a helping hand to perform better in the future, but it's also an interesting way to really amplify some of the qualities that was here that most people wouldn't see.
This is perhaps the perfect example. So the floor that you've taken up, you've found materials there, that's then been repurposed as these furniture and tables and corrugated sheets that we were talking about before. Yep. I want to ask as well, our reportage is centred around the big ideas from the Biennale. What's the big idea from the Danish pavilion?
The big idea is that I think there's a future in architecture when buildings are starting to reconfigure themselves, start to heal themselves, that our built environment can serve can kind of work like as a metabolistic process. So they find most of their materials within themselves. And I think this is not just because we have to be more resource aware, but it's also because it's a way of amplifying some of their past qualities in new future configurations.
And then that also ties in, which I really love what you said before, to the storytelling side of things. Exactly. So tapping into a history that's already here and people really respond to that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it is. So for instance, like the floor that we're standing on right now, it's a polished earthen floor just made out of the excavated earth. But since we are polishing it down, you also see all the aggregates that's a part of it. And all the aggregates, they have different colors. Some of them are red because there was bricks underneath the pavilion. It's part of the floor now. You start to see all these colors that were already present in the pavilion to begin with, because that's the only material that we're working with, right? So it's really a question of how far you want to go in processing materials. And I feel that there's a whole field in architecture that's not really been explored yet.
That was Søren Filman there. Now, Grace, we're heading back to you for our last interview on today's program, and we're going to the Swiss Pavilion. Tell us a little bit about it.
There was a really interesting exhibition this year which was called, and it's not necessarily the catchiest of titles, get ready.
I'm bracing myself.
The final form is determined by the architect on site. What does this mean? It poses the question, what if Lisbeth Sachs, rather than Bruno Giacometti, had designed the Swiss Pavilion? Lisbeth Sachs was a Swiss architect from the 1950s who was one of the first registered women to practice in the country. And she was a contemporary of Bruno Giacometti, who's a lot more celebrated and known. And he designed the Swiss Pavilion in the Giardini. And just for wider context, until this year when Lena Gottmey was announced as the architect for the new Qatar Pavilion in the Giardini, not a single one of those structures had been designed by a woman. So the aim of the curatorial team this year was to recreate and superimpose the art hall that Lisbeth Sachs had designed in 1958 for an exhibition in Zurich.
So much of these biennales in recent years have been about looking at the architectural canon and the way that we've been talking, documenting and presenting architecture. And there are so many voices that maybe have been a little bit left behind or haven't been picked up on. And I think that was what was so beautiful about this. It's about celebrating somebody that previously maybe hadn't got the recognition that she was due, which I think is particularly important when we're re-examining our relationship to the built environment and making sure that it does ultimately serve everyone and not just the people that end up designing it. What I also liked was there was, I guess, this multi-sensory element to it as well. Can you maybe set that up a little bit for us before we hear from the curatorial team?
Yeah, so you enter and it's a little bit confusing. You're not sure where to go. There are curtains sort of wafting in the wind with this concrete sort of structure in the background. And then you start to hear noises and you're not sure if they're coming from inside or outside. An art installation by Axel Stiefel, who's a Geneva-based artist. And she asked the architects to take field recordings from their daily life, snippets of conversation, but also from the construction process on site. So that was a way of bringing this two old structures into the present and, pushing it forward. It's a really nice way of adding confusion, but also maybe a layer of modernity to the project, because you've got this Bruno Giacometti structure, which is really angular, made from concrete, and then it has a radial curving layer by Lisbeth Sachs that has been superimposed on top. So it's basically an exercise in layering different architectural elements. So I spoke to two of the team who are curating the Swiss Pavilion this year, Axel Stiefel and Miriam Uzor.
This might sound like a bit binary, like what if Lisbeth Sachs instead of Giacometti, but really for us this was more like a productive fiction, like as an entry to this whole design project. And it's really important for us to let the two of them communicate together and make them become one great architecture. So it's not about Giacometti so much, it's also maybe not about Lisbeth Sachs so much. In the end, it's about where we are right now, which is a new space, which allows like a lot of movement and encounters in the end. And it's a physical experience. It's also a sensual experience, and that was really crucial for us, like to offer as architects and artists an experience which is not only virtual.
What do you hope people will experience when they come in? They walk through, they're maybe a little bit lost like I was when I was trying to find my way. You talk about sensuality, but like in the five senses, how did you attack this?
Its space is stuttering or shimmering, and the senses are confused a little. You don't know if the sounds are from inside or outside. But this is the point of it, lose oneself and give yourself over to a sense of inhabiting. One of the first steps of negotiation was to get the part of the structure of Lisbeth Sachs coming out of the walls of Giacometti. When you're in the Giardini, the exhibition is evanescing, or is an alien inhabitant that comes to you. The idea of Lisbeth Sachs was to bring the park into the exhibition space, the Kunsthalle. It's a different thing exhibiting paintings of landscape and the suggestion that the park has to come inside and you're drawn towards it. So it's a double movement. So it was very important for us to already at the start to negotiate that we can actually extend outside of the walls.
And Lisbeth Sachs, the architect, she, like, to the question in what way or how would you like to experience or perceive art, she replied, wandering, ambling, as if on a promenade through the park. So this is really something we try to take with us and kind of to allow for a visitor to experience when finding their ways to the exhibition.
About the sound, it was not only recording, so also thinking of the trace of what you leave in architecture. We know drawings, we know plans, and what do you do when a building doesn't exist anymore? We add a trace, which is audio, and it's a testimonial also to lift space and time. And the second aspect is the listening. We did a lot of listening session, so we were not only drawn towards a result in the build space, but also to enable revisiting the material and remembering through listening. So that is a hidden part, and you have traces of it in the sound installation process.
That was Axel Stiefel and Miriam Uzor there. That's all we've got for now, but Nick, do you have any final thoughts, any parting remarks you'd like to share?
Well, my two things. One would be to tune into next week's show, which is where we're going to continue the discussion, continue running around the Giardini, and hopefully picking up some nuggets of wisdom and tackling more of these big architectural issues. Two is find an excuse to get to Venice, because this Biennale itself is gorgeous. You know, I've been to this city multiple times, but every single time I'm blown away by the beauty of it. And I think that's what also makes this such a remarkable event. You've got the Biennale, but you've also got this amazing living, breathing city that is a confluence of all these huge architectural issues. So you kind of get to experience the ideas and then also live it too.
Definitely worth visiting Venice, as all of these pavilions will be exhibiting until the 23rd of November 2025. And that's all for today's show. Part 2 of our Venice Architecture Biennale special episodes will air next week. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all great newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans, and I'm Grace Charlton. Thank you for listening.